So do you go for the brand new Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, or do you opt for the slightly older Huawei Mate 20 Pro? The Huawei being released in October last year, the Samsung pretty much a brand new phone, although on the spec sheet and in person they're very, very similar. The Huawei is a bit older, but do you really get better specs from the Samsung? The Huawei is certainly cheaper, here in China anyway. You can get it for about 4,000 RMB. The Samsung here, you have to pay full retail price, 7,000 RMB. That is a big price difference. You can get another phone for the price difference of these two phones, but is the performance difference as big as the price difference? Let's find out. So these two phones definitely go head to head. Even though they're about 5 months apart in the release date, they look similar. On the spec sheet, they're virtually the same, and in person, they're gonna give you that premium flagship feeling. Now, on the Huawei Mate 20 Pro, you get a 6.4-inch screen, exactly the same. On the Samsung, it's a 6.4-inch screen. I love OLED screens, and these two screens on these phones both are incredible. I can't choose between them in terms of using them. Now, actually, the Huawei Mate 20 Pro does have a slightly higher PPI than a Samsung. That's actually because the screen is just slightly smaller. They're both around about 6.4 inch. Now, because Samsung make OLED screens, they're obviously going to save the absolute very best screen for their own smartphone. So on paper, on the spec sheet, maybe you get a slightly better screen. The Huawei Mate 20 Pro has HDR10. The Samsung just goes that little step further and gives you HDR10 Plus. But I don't think there is really any difference in the real world between using both of these screens. Obviously, the main difference between these two screens is just the design. On the Huawei, you get that very iPhone-esque notch on the top of the screen. It does take up a pretty big chunk of real estate up there. Now, of course, Samsung have gone for the first time with the hole punch. Because Samsung have the hole punch, their screen to body ratio just trumps the Huawei. But I guess when you're buying these phones, if you're using just one phone on a daily basis, you get used to it. You get used to the notch and you get used to the hole punch. Which design do you prefer? Do you prefer the hole punch, or are you okay with the notch? Now, because of the notch, Huawei have been able to fit some extra Face ID components in there, so it should be slightly more secure unlocking using your face. Although we've seen some evidence that it can be fooled pretty easily still. Samsung do obviously have a Face ID feature. It's going to be less secure. It just takes a photo of your face essentially. They have that secondary camera in there. It's a depth sensor. But we've seen this is not as secure as Apple's Face ID version. However, both phones really are relying on that front fingerprint sensor to unlock the phone. Again, the technology across both of these phones is slightly different. Huawei are using an imaging sensor under the screen there to unlock your phone. Now, this sensor is slightly older. It's not one of the brand new crop of imaging sensors. It works, and it works well, but the brand new versions, for example in the Xiaomi phone and in upcoming phones this year in 2019, are going to be slightly quicker at unlocking your phone. This is probably an area where the Samsung just edges out the Huawei, because you have that brand new technology, the ultrasonic imaging sensor under the screen of the Samsung. This actually takes a 3D map of your fingerprint. It's not just an image. So it should be more reliable, maybe if your hands are wet or if your hands are greasy, and obviously more secure as well. We've seen in unlocking times as well that obviously things are getting better and better. Into 2019 now, every iteration of these technologies will just unlock the phone faster and faster. Having said that, looking at the price difference of these phones, it may not be worth all of that extra money just to get a slightly faster fingerprint sensor, but it is definitely a very cool option to have. In terms of other design features of the two phones, they are remarkably similar in terms of size, in terms of weight. There's really not that much between them. The Huawei is slightly heavier than the Samsung, although nothing you're really going to notice. You get a really nice ceramic back on that Samsung. I really love that design. And on the Huawei, you get that really unique Huawei design with the ridges on the back Really love both of these. Again, it's down to personal preference which one you prefer. The back camera setup on both of these again is really similar. The design is slightly different on the back. On the Samsung, you get that horizontal row of cameras. It's definitely a unique design feature. I think it looks good. And then you get to the Huawei and they have that square. Again, a really unique design feature. I really like that design as well. It's down to personal preference on the design. I really like both of them. The camera specs on these do differ quite a lot actually. So on the Huawei, you get a 40 megapixel main sensor. On the Samsung, that's a 12 megapixel main sensor. Although interestingly, actually the sensor on the Huawei is slightly bigger than that of the Samsung. If you have a bigger sensor, it should give you slightly more cinematic looking pictures and videos, should give you slightly better depth of field, although there are so many other factors that go into that. And also these sensors are so small anyway, so it's really difficult to say looking on the specs sheet that one camera is better than another. From personal experience using both of the phones, I just absolutely love both cameras. I would say that naturally the Samsung tends to take really poppy, saturated images. Everything is bright and light. Now on the Samsung, you get really clear images, and I would say the color science is maybe a little bit cooler. If you like really poppy, saturated images, you might want to go for the Samsung. If you like slightly cooler looking images, maybe go for the Huawei. Again, that's not saying that one is better than the other. It's just down to personal preference, what type of images you like. When I take pictures on the Samsung, they always look so saturated, so poppy, like they're coming out of the screen. Now that may be due to the actual screen technology as well. When you take a picture on a smartphone, you look at it on the screen. So maybe a lot of the things you like about the image are actually from the screen and not the camera. In any case, two incredible cameras we've seen time and time again, Huawei and Samsung at the top of the list for taking photos that people like. Samsung put optical image stabilization on that main sensor. Huawei don't have it. It may or may not be a deal breaker for you. EIS is so good these days, but I always personally prefer optical image stabilization on that main camera as well. When you're shooting video, the OIS should give you slightly more stabilized images, although to be honest, I've got no complaints from the video out of the Huawei either. The ultra wide camera on both of these is slightly different. I really love ultra wide angle cameras. I just think they look cool. There's a really unique look that you get from them. You can shoot super wide, you can get lots of information in the scene, or if you can get really close to things, you can use them as a macro lens as well. The Huawei gives you a 20 megapixel camera there. The Samsung gives you a 16 megapixel camera there. Not really much between them. Although the angle on the lens is different. The Huawei giving you a 16mm lens, the Samsung giving you a 12 megapixel lens. So that means that the Samsung will give you even wider images than the Huawei. Zooming in and out on the camera apps on both of them is also very similar. You can pinch to zoom, you can use a slider. On the Samsung, they have little trees in the middle where you can go from the normal to the telephoto to the ultra wide. On the Huawei, they have a little button with ×1, ×2, and then out to the ultra wide as well. The telephoto or zoom lens on both of these is actually pretty different. The Samsung zooms into 52mm, whereas the Huawei zooms into 80mm. So the Huawei is giving you a much more zoomed in shot than the Samsung. Again, I can't say that one is better or worse than the other. They just give you slightly different options. The Samsung gives you a slightly wider angle lens on the ultra wide. The Huawei gives you a slightly more zoomed in lens with the telephoto. Which one you think you'll use more or have more use for is obviously your choice. Now moving on to the front camera there, the S10 Plus actually gives you that dual camera at the front there. Now one of the cameras is actually a depth sensor, so you're not going to get any images from that. The front camera on the Samsung is 10 megapixels and it has an option to have a slightly wider angle and a slightly more zoomed in angle. There's only one camera on the front there, so I assume what the camera is doing when it zooms in is just cropping into the image a little bit. That's actually something that you could do yourself after you've taken the photo. in the editing software, but Samsung have given you the option just to do it in camera. The Huawei gives you a 24 megapixel camera on the front there. Selfie cameras are never really that great on any phone, although on the Samsung you do get the option to record 4K video from that front camera, whereas on the Huawei they just stick with 1080p. Video on both of these, again, so similar. They both give you 4K recording. The Samsung just edges it, giving you 60 frames a second 4K video, but that is something that I'm not sure many people have a use for. Again, the Samsung gives you ultra slow-mo 240 frames a second in 1080p, whereas the Huawei gives you 60 frames a second slow-mo in 1080p. So there's definitely a difference there, obviously because of the difference in chips between these. So let's get on to that Snapdragon 855 versus the Kirin 980. Now, depending on which market you're in, you might be getting Samsung's Exynos chip or the Snapdragon 855 chip. In any case, looking at Geekbench, you can see single core, multi-core, Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus is leading the way. Brand new phone, you expect that from Samsung, but the next competitor is the Huawei Mate 20 Pro. And actually, if you look at the difference between them, it's not that large. And in any case, a Geekbench score is not the same as real world usage. I'll say that both of these phones are incredibly powerful. They load intensive apps pretty quickly, and you're not going to see a massive real world difference between these two. The Huawei comes with 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. The Samsung starts at 8 and you can go up to 12 gigabytes. If you're looking to have the phone for a few years, which you probably are, then you might want to choose the Samsung, because over that time having slightly more RAM is probably going to serve you better. Although the price for that 12 gigabyte version definitely starts to step up a bit. So much so that you'll probably be paying double the price for that version over the Huawei. Wireless charging, big batteries, USB-C type connectors, they both have. They also both have that reverse charging feature, something that you're probably not going to use very much, but it just shows how incredibly similar these phones are. They really have a ton of exactly the same features, slight differences here and there, but using either of these phones on a daily basis, you're going to get very, very similar results. In fact, the only thing that may sway you to go with one or the other is the price.